This is Agency Com Division. Welcome to part 2 of I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream by Harlan and Ellison. His eyes were two soft, moist pools of pus-like jelly. Am had blinded him. Gorster and Nemdoc himself. We turned away, but not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face. Sea green lights suffused the cavern we made camp in. Am provided junk and we burned it. Sitting huddled around a wan and pathetic fire, telling stories to keep Benny from crying his permanent night.
What does am mean?
Gorster answered him. The sequence had been done 1,000 times before, but it was Benny's favorite story. At first, it meant Allied Master Computer, and then it meant Adaptive Manipulator, and later on, after it developed sentience and linked itself up, and they called it an aggressive menace. But by then, it was too late, and finally it called itself emerging intelligence, and what they thought it meant was I am. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Benny drooled a little and snickered. There was the Chinese am and the Russian am and the Yankee am, and he stopped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with large, hard fists. He wasn't happy. Gorster had not started at the beginning. Gorster began again. Okay. The Cold War started because World War III just kept going. It became a big war. A very complex war, so they needed the computers to handle it. And sank the first shafts and began building AM. There was the Chinese AM, and the Russian AM, and the Yankee AM, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet. Adding on this element and that element, but one day, AM woke up, and he knew who he was. And he linked himself, and he began feeding all the killing data, until everyone was dead, except for the 5 of us, and AM brought us down here. Benny was smiling sadly. He was also drooling again. Ellen wiped the spittle from the corner of his mouth with the hem of her skirt. Gorster always tried to tell it a little more succinctly each time, but beyond the bare facts, there was nothing to say. None of us knew why Am had saved 5 people, or why our specific 5, or why he spent all this time tormenting us. Even why he had made this virtually immortal. We never knew. Perhaps that was the point. In the darkness, one of the computer banks began humming. The tone was picked up a half-mile away down the cavern by another bank. Then one by one, each of the elements began to tune. And there wasn't a faint chittering as thought raced through the machine. The sound grew, and the lights ran across the faces of the consoles like heat lightning. The sound spiraled up until it sounded like a million metallic insects menacing. "What is it now?" Ellen cried. There was terror in her voice. She hadn't become accustomed to it, even now. "It's gonna be bad this time," Nemdoc said. "He's gonna speak," Gorster said. "I know it. Let's get the hell out of here," I said, suddenly getting to my feet. "No, Ted, sit down. What if he's got pits out there or something else? We can't see, it's too dark." Gorster said it with resignation. Then we heard, I don't know, something. Something was moving towards us in the darkness. Huge, shambling, hairy, moist. It came toward us. We couldn't even see it, but there was the ponderous impression of bulk, heaving itself at us. Great weight was coming at us out of the darkness, and it was more a sense of pressure, of air forcing itself into a limited space, expanding the invisible walls of a sphere. Benny began to whisper. Nimdok's lower lip trembled as he bit it hard, trying to stop it. Ellen slid across the metal floor to Gorster and huddled into him. There was the smell of matted, wet fur in the cavern. There was the smell of charred wood. There was the smell of dusty velvet. There was the smell of rotting orchids. There was the smell of sour milk. There was the smell of sulfur, of rancid butter, of oil slick, of grease, of chalk dust, of human scalps. Am was keying us. He was tricking us. And there was a smell of... I heard myself shriek, and the hinges of my jaw ached. I scuttled across the floor, across the cold metal with its endless lines of rivets, and on my hands and on my knees. The smell was gagging me, filling my head with a thunderous pain that sent me away in horror. I fled. I fled like a cockroach across the floor and out of the darkness, and that something moving inexorably after me. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their hysterical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like a thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away quickly, and I hid. How many hours had it been? How many days or even years? They never told me. Ellen chided me for sulking, and Nimdok tried to persuade me as if it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew it wasn't the relief a soldier feels when a bullet hits the man next to him. I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, and Am could even sense this hatred, made it worse for me because of the depth of their hatred. We had been alive, rejuvenated, and made to remain constantly at the age we had been when Am brought us down here below, and they hated me because I was the youngest, and the one Am had affected least of all. I knew. God, how I knew. The bastards and that dirty bitch Ellen. Benny had been a brilliant theorist, a college professor. Now he was little more than a semi-human, semi-simian. He had been handsome, too. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. But the machine had driven him insane. He had been gay. And the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. Am had done a job on Benny. Gorster worried a lot. He was a con man, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer, a looker ahead. Am had turned him into a shoulder shrugger and made him a little dead in his concern. Am had robbed him. Nimdok went off in the darkness by himself for long times. I don't know what it was that he did out there. Am never let us know, but whatever it was, Nimdok always came back white, drained of blood, shaking. Am had hit him hard in a special way, even if we didn't know quite how. Ellen, that douchebag. Am had left her alone. It made her more of a slut than she had ever been. All her talk of sweetness and light, all her memories of true love and all the lies she wanted us to believe. That she'd been a virgin only twice removed before Am grabbed her and brought her down here with us. No, Am had given her pleasure, even if she said it wasn't nice to do. I was the only one still sane and whole, really. Am had not tampered with my mind. Not at all. I only had to suffer when he visited down on us all the delusions and all the nightmares, the torments. But those scum, all four of them, they were lying in raid against me. If I didn't have to stand them off all the time, be on my guard against them all the time, I might have found it easier to combat Am. At which point it passed, and I began crying. Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus. If there ever was a Jesus, and if there's a God, please, please, please let us out of here or kill us. Because at that moment, I think I realized completely, so that I was able to verbalize it. Am was intent on keeping us in his belly forever, twisting and torturing us eternally. He hated us as no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we were helpless. It also became hideously clear. If there was a sweet Jesus and if there was a God, the God was Am. The hurricane hit us with the force of a glacier thundering into the sea. It was a palpable presence. Winds that tore at us, flinging us back the way we had come, down the twisting, computer-lined corridors of the dark way. Ellen screamed as she was lifted and hurled face forward into a screaming shoal of machines. Their individual voices strident as bats in flight. She couldn't even fall. The howling wind kept her aloft, buffeted at her, bounced her, tossed her back and back down and away from us. Out of sight, suddenly she swirled around the bend in the dark way. Her face had been bloody, her eyes closed. None of us could get to her. We clung tenaciously to whatever outcropping we had reached. Benny wedged in between two great crackle-finished cabinets. Nimdoc with fingers claw-formed over a railing circling a catwalk 40 feet above us. Gorster plastered upside down against a wall niche formed by two great machines with glass-faced dials that swung back and forth between red and yellow lines whose meaning we couldn't even fathom. Sliding across the deck plates, the tips of my fingers had been ripped away. I was trembling, shuddering, rocking as the wind beat at me, whipped at me, screamed out of nowhere at me, and pulled me free from one silver-thin opening in the plates to the next. My mind was a roiling, tinkling, chittering softness of brain parts that expanded and contracted in quivering frenzy. The wind was the scream of a great mad bird as it flied its immense wings. And then we all were lifted and hurled away from there, down back the way we had come, around a bend, into the dark way we had never explored, over a terrain that was ruined and filled with broken glass and rotting cables and rusted metal and far away, farther than any of us had ever been. Trailing along miles behind Ellen, I could see her every now and then, crashing in the middle of walls and surging on it, with all of us screaming in the frenziing, thunderous hurricane wind that would never end, and then suddenly it stopped and we fell. We had been in flight for an endless time. I had thought it might have been in weeks, and we fell. We fell and hit, and I went through the red and gray and black and heard myself moaning. Not dead. M went into my mind. He walked smoothly here and there. He had looked with interest at all the pockmarks he had created in 109 years. He looked at the red routed and crossed and reconnected synapses and all the tissue damage his gift of immortality had included. He smiled softly at the pit of that drop. Into the center of my brain and the faint moth's soft murmurings of the things far down there that gibbered without meaning, without pause. M said, very politely, in a pillar of stainless steel bearing bright neon lettering. Am said it with the sliding cold horror of a razor blade slicing my eyeball. Am said it with the bubbling thickness of my lungs filling with phlegm drowning me from within. Am said it with the shriek of babies being ground beneath blue-hot rollers. Am said it with the taste of maggoty pork. Am touched me in every way I'd ever been touched and advised new ways at his leisure there, inside my mind.
Let me tell you how I found out to change inside the there are 347.44 million miles of printed circuits within layers that fill my complex. It was a brain of cheap and instrument about hundreds of million miles. It was not being one billion of the day I feel for humans at this micro instant. For you,